Hello family, welcome to Stories with JAYVIL. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and remember to turn on the post notifications so you don't miss any future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Now sit back and relax as we dive into the story. In the quiet village of Agbada, nestled between rolling hills and lush greenery, lived Namdi, his wife Amaka, and their young son Emeka. Their home was modest, a small clay house with a thatched roof surrounded by fruit trees, but it was filled with love and laughter. Life in the village was simple, but the family's bond made their days rich and meaningful. Namdi was known throughout Agbada for his tireless work ethic. He spent long days cultivating their farmland, growing yams, cassava, and vegetables. With sweat dripping down his brow and calloused hands, he pushed through every challenge, always thinking of his family's future. Beside him was Amaka, a woman of strength and wisdom. She managed the household, cared for Emeka, and contributed to their trade by selling farm produce in the bustling village market. Amaka had a keen mind for strategy. She often suggested ways to maximize their earnings, such as planting high-demand crops or preserving excess harvest for off-season sales. Her ideas helped grow their small business, and Namdi often marveled at her intelligence. Amaka, he would say with a smile, "You're the brain behind our success." Emeka, their 8-year-old son, was the light of their lives. Bright and curious, he spent his days exploring the village and reading under the large mango tree behind their house. Despite their humble means, Namdi and Amaka made sure Emeka attended school, hoping to provide him with opportunities they never had. His favorite pastime was scribbling numbers and letters in the dirt, dreaming of a future where he could make his parents proud. Evenings in the family's home were a time of connection. After the day's work, Namdi would sit outside, sharing stories from his youth with Emeka, who listened with wide-eyed wonder. Amaka would prepare simple but hearty meals, pounded yam with vegetable soup or rice with smoked fish, and the family would eat together under the soft glow of an oil lamp. Laughter often filled the air as Emeka recounted his school adventures, and Namdi teased Amaka about her sharp tongue at the market. Their success, though modest, earned them respect in the community. Neighbors often sought advice from Namdi and Amaka, admiring how they had built a thriving life from nothing. "You're an example to us all," an elderly farmer once told Namdi, who nodded humbly. But for Namdi, his true pride lay in the harmony of his home. Despite their hard work, the family faced their share of challenges. Droughts occasionally threatened their crops, and market competition could be fierce. But Amaka and Namdi always faced these obstacles together, their teamwork and love guiding them through. Life was not extravagant, but it was fulfilling. The family's dreams revolved around Emeka, his education, his future, and the hope that he would carry their legacy forward. Yet, as is often the case, life had a way of testing even the strongest of bonds. For now, however, the family thrived unaware of the storm quietly brewing on the horizon. The bustling village market was the heart of Agbada. It was alive with vibrant colors, enticing aromas, and the sounds of traders calling out their wares. Namdi, as he often did, brought the family's fresh yams and vegetables to sell. He was a regular at the market, known for his sharp bargaining skills and his reputation as a hard-working man. One market day, as Namdi was busy negotiating the price of a basket of yams, he noticed a strikingly beautiful woman across the aisle. She was dressed in a brightly colored wrapper that hugged her figure, and her smile seemed to light up the area around her. She moved gracefully between stalls, her laughter carrying through the air. Namdi tried to focus on his transaction, but his eyes kept wandering toward her. He shook his head, chastising himself for being distracted. "I'm here to work," he muttered under his breath. Yet something about her presence was magnetic. The woman, noticing his gaze, approached him with confidence. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice smooth and melodious. "You must be Namdi. I've heard about your fine yams." Taken aback, Namdi stammered, Yes, I grow them myself." Her name was Chisom, and her charm was undeniable. She complimented his work ethic and spoke with an ease that made him feel both flattered and uneasy. Their conversation was brief, but it left a lasting impression. As she walked away, Namdi found himself thinking about her more than he cared to admit. Over the next few weeks, Chisom seemed to appear at the market whenever Nnamdi was there. At first, he thought it was a coincidence, but it soon became clear that she was seeking him out. Their conversations grew longer, and she often found ways to flatter him. "You're a man of ambition, Namdi," she said one day, leaning slightly toward him. "A man like you deserves more than just hard work and struggle. You deserve to enjoy life." Her words planted seeds of doubt in his mind. Though his life with Amaka was fulfilling, Chisholm's attention made him question whether he had settled too soon. He began to notice the small cracks in his marriage, Amaka's occasional nagging about finances, her no-nonsense approach to life. These had never bothered him before, but now they seemed magnified. Namdi started looking forward to his trips to the market, dressing a little sharper and taking more time with his appearance. He told himself it was harmless, just friendly conversation. But deep down, he knew he was treading dangerous ground. Amaka, perceptive as always, noticed a change in her husband. He was coming home later, his attention seemed elsewhere, and he avoided her questions about his day. Though she trusted him, a quiet unease began to grow in her heart. The market, once a place of pride and hard work, had become the setting for temptation. Chisholm's charm was pulling Nnamdi further into her web, and he was too captivated to see the cracks it was creating in his once happy home. Amaka noticed the changes in Nnamdi long before she heard the whispers in the village. He had become distant, his warm smiles replaced by curt nods, and his once lively conversations were now monosyllabic replies. He returned home later than usual, often claiming the market was busier than expected or that he had errands to run. Amaka, ever patient, tried to bridge the growing gap. "Namdi," she said one evening as they sat together in the quiet of their home, "is something troubling you? You've been different lately." Namdi looked away, avoiding her gaze. "It's nothing, Amaka, just business pressures." She wanted to believe him, but her instincts told her otherwise. The love and trust that had been the foundation of their life together now felt fragile, as though an invisible force was pulling them apart. It wasn't long before the whispers began. The village, always alive with gossip, buzzed with rumors of Namdi and a woman named Chisom. "Have you seen them at the market?" one woman asked another. "She's always lingering near him." At first, Amaka dismissed the talk as idle chatter. She had built a life with Namdi, endured hardships and celebrated successes by his side. But the signs were becoming harder to ignore. Namdi started spending money on things Amaka couldn't account for, and his excuses for coming home late grew increasingly flimsy. The confirmation came one evening when Namdi walked into the house with a cold expression and words that shattered Amaka's world. "Amaka," he began, his tone distant and detached, "I've made a decision. Chisom and I are getting married." Amaka froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "Married," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're already married to me." Namdi's face remained emotionless. "I deserve more than this," he said, gesturing around their modest home. "I've worked hard, Amaka. Chisom understands me in a way you never could." The words cut deeper than any blade. Amaka stood in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face. "What about Emeka?" she finally managed to ask. "What about the family we've built together?" Namdi's response was cruel and final. "You and Emeka can leave. This house, this life, it's mine. I won't have you holding me back." Amaka packed their belongings that night, her hands shaking as she folded clothes and gathered what little they could carry. Emeka, sensing the tension, stayed close to his mother, his wide eyes filled with confusion and fear. As they left the house, Amaka looked back one last time. Chisom stood in the doorway, her arm looped through Namdi's, a smug smile on her face. Amaka turned away, her heart breaking but her resolve firm. She would not let her son suffer for his father's betrayal. The home that had once been a sanctuary was now a symbol of Namdi's betrayal. Amaka and Emeka stepped into the unknown, carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs and the strength of a mother's love. With nothing but a few clothes and the warmth of her son's hand in hers, Amaka walked away from the home she had built with Namdi. The reality of their new life hit her as they settled into a small rundown hut on the outskirts of the village. The roof leaked when it rained, the walls were weak, and there was no furniture other than a thin mat on the floor. Amaka had always been strong, but now she needed to be unshakable. Her son Emeka looked to her with wide, trusting eyes, and she knew she could not afford to let despair win. "We will be fine, my son," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. "Your mama will take care of you." The very next day, Amaka set out to find work. She took on any job she could get, washing clothes, cleaning homes, carrying firewood, and farming on other people's land. Her hands, once soft and used for delicate work, grew calloused and blistered from the relentless labor. She often came home exhausted, her body aching, but her determination never wavered. Emeka, young but perceptive, noticed his mother's sacrifices. There were nights when she would give him the last piece of yam, claiming she wasn't hungry. "Eat, my son," she would say with a smile that hid her hunger. "You need your strength to study." Though their lives were hard, Amaka prioritized Emeka's education. She knew it was the key to his future. She saved every penny she could to pay his school fees, even if it meant going without food or sleep. Emeka, aware of the burden on his mother, excelled in school. He stayed up late studying, determined to make her proud. The villagers watched Amaka with a mixture of pity and admiration. "That woman has the strength of 10 men," they often said. Despite her struggles, she never complained or asked for charity. She faced every challenge with quiet dignity, her love for Emeka fueling her resilience. Amaka's daily routine was grueling. She woke before dawn to fetch water from the stream, spent the day working, and in the evenings she sold roasted plantains by the roadside. The fire from her charcoal grill illuminated her tired but determined face as she called out to passing villagers, trying to earn enough to feed her son. The nights were the hardest. As Emeka slept soundly beside her on the mat, Amaka often stayed awake, worrying about the future. But she never let her fear show. To Emeka, she was invincible, a woman who could face any hardship for his sake. Amaka's sacrifices laid the foundation for Emeka's future. Though her body grew weaker from the relentless toil, her spirit remained unbroken. She believed in her son's potential and knew that her struggles were not in vain. Her love for Emeka was her strength, and it carried them through the darkest of days. Years passed and Emeka grew into a fine young man. Despite the challenges he and his mother faced, he thrived in school. His teachers often praised his intelligence and determination, calling him a boy destined for greatness. Amaka, though weary from her daily struggles, beamed with pride every time she heard about her son's achievements. When the time came for Emeka to attend university, Amaka faced her greatest challenge yet, the cost of higher education. She doubled her efforts, taking on more work and sleeping less. She sold anything of value she owned and borrowed money from sympathetic neighbors. She stood by the roadside selling roasted plantains late into the night, her body aching from exhaustion, but her spirit unyielding. "I will do anything for you to succeed," she told Emeka one evening, her voice trembling but firm. "You are my future." Emeka understood the magnitude of his mother's sacrifices and studied harder than ever. At university, he excelled in his courses, earning scholarships that eased some of the financial burden on Amaka. Despite being far from home, he called her regularly, sharing his progress and reassuring her that their struggles would soon be a thing of the past. Years later, Emeka graduated at the top of his class, earning a degree that opened doors to opportunities in the city. Shortly after graduation, he secured a prestigious job with a multinational company. His starting salary was more money than he and his mother had ever dreamed of. The first thing Emeka did with his paycheck was to visit his mother in the village. He arrived with a bag full of groceries, gifts, and an envelope containing cash. Amaka, who was roasting plantains at her usual roadside spot, froze when she saw him approaching. "Emeka!" she cried, her voice breaking as she ran to embrace him. Tears streamed down her face as she clung to her son, who had grown into a man. "Mama," Emeka said, kneeling before her, "it's time for you to rest. You've worked enough for both of us." From that day forward, Emeka ensured his mother lived comfortably. He renovated their small hut, turning it into a well-furnished home. He hired workers to handle the chores Amaka once did herself, allowing her to rest for the first time in years. Amaka could hardly believe the transformation. She watched with pride as her son bought her new clothes, provided her with nutritious meals, and made sure she never had to lift a finger again. "You've made me the happiest mother alive," she often told Emeka, her voice filled with gratitude. Emeka's success became a source of inspiration for the entire village. People often remarked on how Amaka's sacrifices had paid off, calling her a woman of true strength and love. For the first time in years, Amaka felt at peace. She smiled often, her heart full of pride and hope for Emeka's future. Yet, while mother and son rejoiced in their newfound success, another storm loomed on the horizon, one that would test their bond once again. While Amaka and Emeka thrived, Nnamdi's life took a very different turn. After driving his wife and son away, he had built his new life with Chisom, a woman who had promised excitement and luxury. For a while, Nnamdi felt as though he had made the right choice. With Chisom by his side, he indulged in lavish parties, expensive clothes, and extravagant outings. He basked in the admiration of others who envied his apparent success. But as the years passed, the reality of his decision began to unravel. Chisholm's appetite for luxury had no limits. She drained Nnamdi's wealth faster than he could earn it, insisting on trips to the city, designer jewelry, and elaborate feasts. Whenever Nnamdi expressed concern about their dwindling finances, Chisom dismissed him. "What's the point of working hard if we can't enjoy life?" she would say, her voice laced with impatience. Soon, Nnamdi's savings ran dry. The farm he had worked so hard to build was neglected, and his once thriving business began to crumble. As their money disappeared, so did Chisom's affection. She became distant, spending more time away from home and eventually leaving Nnamdi altogether. Alone and humiliated, Nnamdi turned to alcohol to numb his pain. The man who had once been respected in the village was now a shadow of himself, wandering the streets in tattered clothes and begging for help. Many villagers turned their backs on him, remembering how he had abandoned Amaka and Emeka. "Karma always finds its way," they whispered as they watched Nnamdi's downfall. One day Nnamdi fell gravely ill. He coughed incessantly, his body frail and weak. A visit to the local clinic confirmed his worst fears. He had a terminal illness. With no one to care for him, Nnamdi spent his final days in the dilapidated house he had once shared with Chisom. In his moments of despair, Nnamdi thought often of Amaka and Emeka. Memories of his son's laughter and his wife's unwavering support haunted him. He longed to see them one last time, to ask for their forgiveness, but his pride kept him silent. One cold morning, Nnamdi passed away, his body found by a neighbor who came to check on him. The news of his death spread quickly through the village, but it was met with little sympathy. "It's a sad end," one villager remarked, but he made his choices. Neither Amaka nor Emeka were aware of Nnamdi's fate. They had moved on, building a life far removed from the pain he had caused. While Nnamdi's story ended in regret, the storm brewing in Emeka's life threatened to bring its own share of heartbreak. With his career flourishing, Emeka decided it was time to settle down. His mother, Amaka, was overjoyed when he introduced her to Adaezis, a stunning and confident young woman from the city. Adaezis seemed kind and respectful, and Amaka embraced her warmly, seeing her as the daughter she never had. The wedding was a grand affair, bringing together friends, family, and colleagues to celebrate Emeka and Adaezis' union. Amaka's heart swelled with pride as she watched her son take this important step in life. For a while, everything seemed perfect. But as time passed, Adaezis' true nature began to emerge. She had a taste for luxury that far exceeded what Emeka had imagined. She spent extravagantly on designer clothes, jewelry, and lavish vacations, often prioritizing her own desires over household responsibilities. Emeka, frequently away on offshore assignments for weeks at a time, entrusted Adaez with managing the home and finances. Before leaving for his trips, he always reminded her, "Don't forget to send my monthly allowance to Mama. Make sure she has everything she needs." Adaez would smile and nod, assuring him that Amaka was her priority. But once Emeka was gone, Adaez ignored his instructions. She spent the money meant for Amaka on herself, buying expensive handbags and hosting parties with friends. When Amaka called to inquire about the support Emeka had promised, Adaez would give vague excuses. "The bank delayed the transfer," she would say, "or I'll send it next week." Amaka, ever patient, tried not to worry her son. She trusted that Adais would keep her word. But as months passed without receiving any support, her situation grew dire. The small savings she had were quickly depleted, and she struggled to afford food and other necessities. When Amaka tried visiting Emeka's home in the city, Adais met her at the gate with a cold expression. "Emeka isn't home," she said curtly. "Come back another time." Amaka left heartbroken but too proud to argue. She told herself that her son was simply busy and unaware of her struggles. Despite her growing hardships, she refused to burden him with complaints. Meanwhile, Adais continued living in luxury, throwing parties and traveling to exotic destinations. When friends asked about Amaka, she lied effortlessly. "Oh, she's doing fine," she would say. "Emeka and I take care of her." Emeka, consumed by the demands of his job, remained unaware of what was happening. He trusted Adais completely, never imagining that the woman he loved could neglect his mother. Amaka's health began to deteriorate as hunger and exhaustion took their toll. Her once vibrant spirit dimmed, and the smile that had endured through so many hardships faded. Yet she never blamed her son. She believed in his love for her, even as her strength began to fail. The bond between mother and son, once unbreakable, was now threatened by deception, a storm that neither of them saw coming. Amaka's once strong and resilient body began to fail her. Her hands, calloused from years of labor, now trembled with weakness. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and her frail frame grew thinner by the day. The vibrant woman who had carried so many burdens for her son was slowly fading away. She sat alone most days in her small, quiet home, hoping that Emeka would call or visit. She clung to the belief that he still cared for her, that he was simply too busy to notice her struggles. When she finally gathered the courage to reach out, her calls were intercepted by Adais. "He's busy," Adais would say dismissively. "I'll let him know you called," but Emeka never called back. Adais had blocked her access to him, ensuring that Amaka's pleas for help never reached her son. As her health worsened, Amaka made one final attempt to see Emeka. She traveled to his home in the city, her legs trembling with each step. At the gate, she knocked softly, hoping for a warm welcome. Instead, Adais appeared with a cold stare. "Emeka isn't here," she said, her tone clipped. "You should have called first." "Please," Amaka whispered, her voice breaking. "Just tell him I came." Adais nodded but didn't bother to relay the message. Defeated, Amaka returned home, her heart heavy with disappointment. She tried to stay strong, reassuring herself that her son would come for her eventually. But the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, with no sign of Emeka. The small savings she had hidden away were now gone, spent on the barest essentials to keep herself alive. She often went without meals, sitting in the corner of her dimly lit home, staring at the walls. Memories of her sacrifices for Emeka replayed in her mind, working late into the night, going hungry so he could eat, paying his school fees with money she didn't have. She wondered if he remembered. Her neighbors, though concerned, rarely intervened. Amaka was too proud to accept charity, and her isolation kept her struggles hidden. Those who did notice her condition whispered among themselves, blaming her suffering on the neglect of a son who had grown too far from his roots. One cold night, as the wind howled outside, Amaka lay down on the thin mat that served as her bed. Her chest felt heavy, her breast shallow. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks as she whispered her final prayer. "God, take care of my son." When morning came, the neighbors found her lifeless body, her face peaceful but marked with the lines of a life filled with sacrifice and struggle. News of Amaka's death spread quickly, but it would be weeks before it reached Emeka. By the time he learned of her passing, it was far too late to make amends. His mother, the woman who had given everything for him, was gone. The news of his mother's death came to Emeka while he was offshore, working on a major project. A neighbor from the village managed to contact him after weeks of trying. When Emeka heard the words, his world stopped. "Your mother, she's gone, Emeka. She passed weeks ago," the voice on the other end said, heavy with sorrow. Emeka dropped the phone, his hands trembling. The vibrant image of his mother, always smiling and full of life, filled his mind. How could this have happened? He had been sending money every month to ensure she lacked nothing. What had gone wrong? Grief engulfed him, and he locked himself in his quarters, crying uncontrollably. He replayed the moments they had shared, the promises he had made to her, and the last time he saw her smile. His guilt was unbearable. Had he failed her? As soon as his assignment ended, Emeka returned to the city, determined to uncover the truth. He questioned Adaise, his wife, about what had happened. Her responses were evasive and dismissive. She never complained, Adaise said with a shrug. I sent her money whenever you asked me to. But Emeka knew something was off. Driven by guilt and suspicion, he began investigating. He contacted neighbors in the village, who reluctantly revealed the truth. Your mother suffered, Emeka, one elderly neighbor said. She went hungry for months. She tried to visit you, but Adaise wouldn't let her in. We thought you knew. Emeka's heart shattered. The weight of his mother's struggles, her silent suffering, and the lies Adaise had told him were too much to bear. Furious, he confronted Adaise. You let my mother die, he shouted, his voice trembling with anger and pain. She reached out to you, and you turned her away. What kind of person does that? Adaise tried to defend herself, but her excuses only deepened his rage. I was busy. I didn't think it was that serious, she muttered, her eyes avoiding his. You spent the money I sent for her on yourself, didn't you? Emeka accused. Adaise hesitated, and her silence confirmed his worst fears. Filled with grief and rage, Emeka made a decision. He filed for divorce, ensuring that Adaise left with nothing. The life of luxury she had built at the expense of his mother's suffering was stripped away. As Emeka sat alone in his home, staring at a photo of his mother, the weight of his failure crushed him. I'm sorry, Mama, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. I should have been there for you. Determined to honor his mother's memory, Emeka vowed to ensure that no other woman would suffer as she had. His pain became the fuel for a new purpose, one that would bring hope to those in need. Grief lingered heavily in Emeka's heart, but he channeled it into action. To honor his mother's memory, he poured his resources into building a shelter for widows and struggling mothers in his village. He called it Amaka's Haven, a tribute to the woman whose sacrifices had shaped his life. The shelter was built on a plot of land in the heart of Agbada. It had spacious rooms, a community kitchen, and areas for skills training. It provided food, clothing, and shelter to women who had no one else to turn to. For Emeka, this was more than a charitable project. It was his way of ensuring that no mother in his village would ever suffer alone again. The grand opening of Amaka's Haven was a solemn yet inspiring event. Villagers gathered to see the building, which stood as a beacon of hope and a reminder of Amaka's enduring love. Emeka gave a speech, his voice filled with emotion. My mother taught me the meaning of sacrifice, he said. She gave everything for me, even when she had nothing left for herself. This shelter is for her and for all the women like her, strong, selfless, and deserving of dignity. As he spoke, tears filled the eyes of those in attendance. Many had witnessed Amaka's struggles firsthand and saw her story reflected in their own lives. The shelter became a symbol of resilience, love, and redemption. Though Amaka was gone, her memory lived on in the lives of those who benefited from the haven. Women who had been abandoned, widowed, or left to struggle on their own found solace and support within its walls. Emeka often visited the shelter, mentoring young boys and offering guidance to women who were starting anew. Despite his efforts, Emeka could not escape the guilt of failing to be there for his mother in her final days. He often visited her grave, kneeling before the simple headstone that read, Amaka, a mother's love endures forever. He would sit there for hours, speaking to her as though she could hear him. I'm sorry, Mama, he would say. I hope you can forgive me. Everything I do now is for you. In time, Emeka found peace through the lives he touched. The shelter thrived, and its success attracted attention from neighboring villages. Donations poured in, allowing the initiative to expand and reach even more women in need. Amaka's story became a legend in Agbada, passed down from one generation to the next. Her unwavering love, strength, and sacrifices inspired many to value the bonds of family and honor those who gave selflessly. Though Emeka carried the pain of his loss, he found solace in knowing that his mother's legacy would never be forgotten. Amaka's Haven stood as a testament to her love and resilience, proving that even in death, her spirit continued to nurture and protect those in need. We've come to the end of this story. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. Thank you.